This verdict is for Lynn. The court has found what we have believed to be true for so many years.
Obviously in shock, he's upset.
We have to really properly acknowledge the incredible job that the prosecutors did to finally bring this case home.
A case 40 years in the making.
A $100,000 reward has been offered.
Almost 37 years after mother of two Lynette Dawson disappeared, her ex-husband has been arrested.
In January 1982, 33-year-old Lynette Dawson went missing from her troubled marriage, leaving behind two daughters. Her husband, Chris, has always claimed she left of her own accord after discovering he was having an affair with their 16-year-old babysitter.
He had left his wife and children and sought to move to Queensland only weeks before his wife disappeared.
In 2018, after the case garnered global attention through the podcast Teacher's Pet, Chris was charged with Lynette's murder.
Not answering any questions. Go on, please.
Handing down the verdict today, the judge took apart the defence's case.
I'm satisfied that none of the alleged sightings was a genuine sighting of Lynette Dawson. I've already rejected the contention that relies upon the telephone calls, the bank card activity.
He also picked apart the prosecution, citing the problematic influence of the Teacher's Pet podcast, before concluding,
The whole of the circumstantial evidence satisfies me that Lynette Dawson is dead, that she died on or about 8 January 1982, and that she did not voluntarily abandon her home.
Finally, at the end of a marathon 5-hour reading, Justice Ian Harrison handed down his verdict.
I find you guilty. You may sit down.
Christopher Michael Dawson, convicted of murdering his wife, Lynette Dawson, in January 1982.
Chris Dawson has had 40 years of his life that he has been able to enjoy without any accountability for what's happened.
We would ask Chris Dawson to find it in himself to finally do the decent thing and allow us to bring Lynn home to a peaceful rest.
Well, Claire Harvey is the editorial director of The Australian and co-host of the Teacher's Trial podcast, and she joins us now. Claire, you've been working on this story for years. Did you expect this verdict?
I've got to be honest with you guys. This morning I woke up feeling absolutely sick. I was really concerned that we weren't going to get here today. And of course we had to put our faith in the judge. Hedley Thomas, who's the one who has really done all this work, has been feeling incredibly confident. He's been sure for weeks that Chris Dawson was going to be convicted.
How did Dawson respond?
Oh, it was one of the most incredible things I've seen in 25 years in journalism. He stood up, the judge told him to stand up. He said, Christopher Michael Dawson, I convict you. And then the two court officers, these friendly guys who'd been shepherding people in and out of the courtroom all day, marched over to him and put him in handcuffs, took him into the dock, which hadn't been used at all until that point, and he disappeared behind a door, while behind him people sobbed. He looked absolutely grey. He looked like he was going to throw up. His brother Peter, who'd been sitting next to him, had had his arm around him for the previous 10 minutes, which was the surest sign, as the judge kind of got into some pretty serious legal technicalities, that he was actually about to go down.
Do you think Chris Dawson was expecting it?
Well, this is a guy who's fought it all the way to the High Court. You know, this is a guy who, according to the judge today, began lying about having murdered Lynn Dawson the next morning, you know, the day that he was at the local swimming pool with his children and her mother. That was when, according to the judge, the lies began. And he's maintained that for 40 years. I think he probably thought he was going to get away with it, because why wouldn't he think anything different? He has got away with it up till now.
And also, it's extraordinary that we got a guilty verdict on circumstantial evidence in a murder case that, never found a body. How did that happen?
Well, the thing that everybody has been saying to me is, how can this judge convict? You know, what is the pathway to conviction? And we learned it today. You know, the judge said repeatedly that this was a wholly circumstantial case, but ultimately he had to get to the point where he accepted that there was no other reasonable explanation for all the things that had happened, for the lies, for the fact that he married the babysitter, for the fact that he went and picked up the babysitter 3 days after Lynn disappeared and said to her, Lynn's gone, she's not coming back, for the fact that he gave the babysitter Lynn's wedding rings, that he took her clothes in garbage bags to her parents' house. The judge had to establish that there was no other explanation for that a reasonable person would accept other than that Chris Dawson knew that Lynn was dead because he killed her. The judge is very aware, though, that Chris Dawson is someone who appeals court judgments. He will probably appeal.
Did you get any sense what the grounds for appeal might be?
I think the fundamental claim that Dawson makes, which is kind of a bit of circular logic that blows my mind every time I hear it, is that because police didn't properly investigate his claims back in 1982 that this lovely lady had just abandoned her 2- and 4-year-old children, that leaves him at what he calls a significant forensic disadvantage. That means there's no phone records, there's no fingerprints on anything, there's no body. That will be the grounds of the appeal, I think. He also tried really hard to say that the Teacher's Pet podcast meant that it was absolutely impossible for any witness to have an unclouded recollection. The judge was pretty clear on that today. He said there was one witness who he felt had embellished or changed her story because of stuff that she'd either heard in the podcast or talked about with Hedley Thomas. But the judge said that everybody else, he accepted that their recollections of what they saw and heard was real.
Claire, the podcast was so wildly successful, but not everyone has heard it. I know I've spoken to some friends who now want to listen to it. Do you think now that the verdict is in, that you may re-release it?
Yeah, I think it's going to come back in the future. I can't tell you when, but I'm really hoping that we can bring The Teacher's Pet back to the big audience who loved it the first time around.
Well, while we wait to see what happens to the Teacher's Pet podcast, your podcast, The Teacher's Trial, is available online at theteacherstrial.com.au. The link's on our website if you want to check it out. Claire, thanks so much for joining us. I know it's a busy day for you.
Thanks for having me.